as a marketing professional, it's like the thing that you would use blockchain for is like coming up with a creative way to use tokens to incentivize your customers in a way that you couldn't before.
Welcome to the Agents of Change, the podcast experience you've been waiting for your entire marketing career. Search, social, mobile, AI, blockchain, and neuromarketing. These are the Agents of Change, and so are you. Digital marketing success awaits, and your transformation begins now.
Welcome to another episode of the Agents of Change podcast, the podcast that helps you reach and engage more of your ideal customers online and helps you become the best digital marketer you can be. My name is Rich Brooks. I'm your host. This is episode 535, powered by the Agents of Change Digital Marketing Conference. Oh, am I excited for today's episode. After adding blockchain to our new lineup of the Agents of Change during our rebrand, over the objections of my team, I might add, and after a few aborted attempts, we're finally going to be discussing blockchain in this week's episode, what it means to you, your marketing, and your business. Best of all is, at the end of the day, the blockchain expert was right under my nose. I discovered him because he runs a blockchain meetup right here in Portland, Maine. Speaking of Portland, Maine, have you ever been here? This is a gem of a small city that I'm proud to call home. Now, officially, I live in Greater Portland, but let's not split hairs. I've had my business here in Portland for almost the entire time that I've lived here in Maine. I moved up here in 1999. As I look out my window this morning, I see Casco Bay, the private boats tied to the pier outside DeMillo's, our famous floating restaurant, and Jay's Oyster Bar, who, when they cook garlic, it wafts through my open windows during good weather. And during good weather, also, it attracts a large number of people who are eating and drinking outside, which can get a little distracting, but still all good times. We've got more restaurants per capita than almost anywhere in the United States, a thriving craft beer industry, and of course, lobster shacks. You can walk a couple of blocks from my office, catch the Casco Bay Ferry, and take a cruise out to several islands just off the coast, where you can get lunch, ride your bike, play golf, or rent a golf cart just to cruise around it. Why am I telling you all this? To make sure that you understand that when you come to this year's Agents of Change Digital Marketing Conference on October 9th and 10th, that beyond 2 days of amazing marketing content, beyond seeing 15 fantastic speakers, beyond our deep dive workshops so you can take your career, your business to the next level, you'll have plenty to do and see while you stay here. Plus, we're just a short drive from Freeport and the LL Bean flagship store, whale watches, schooner cruises, and a million other activities. You can drive up the coast, visit quaint New England towns, and watch the leaves change. And you can do all of this while writing off your travel as a business expense. Please check with your accountant first, though. You can learn more information about this year's event, our growing list of speakers, and register for the conference at our website, theagentsofchange.com. Now that advertisement veiled as a message from our visitor bureau is over, let's jump into this week's interview. My guest today is a marketing professional focused on the intersection of technology, society, and our future. He currently works at Chainlink Labs, trying to help tokenize and connect the world's financial systems. Please welcome Jimmy Haight. Jimmy, welcome to the show.
Hey, how we doing?
Excited. I'm excited for this particular conversation. I have so many questions, but let's start with the basics. How would you explain blockchain to a layperson like myself?
Yeah, I think you're asking me like, what do I have to do every Thanksgiving and Christmas? I think that's the question you're really asking. Yeah, I mean, really, blockchains are just a special type of database, rather than being in one location. The database is kept in a shared state across many different called node operators across, can be across the world or whatever. What they're really great at is they're basically an asset ledger. So a shared distributed ledger of who owns what that can update in real time across a decentralized bunch of node operators running the infrastructure.
So if I were trying to dumb that down even further for someone like myself, I mean, like when you're talking about a ledger, you're literally like the old school ledgers where you would literally write down all the things that have happened. So you basically have a history of what's going on, correct?
Yeah, and now I realize I didn't do a great job of dumbing it down to the layperson. But here's what I do is like think about one way to keep a ledger is like say old Excel spreadsheets, right? It's like on your computer, and then anytime you need to make a change, like you can do it. But if you've ever worked in like Google Sheets, where like anyone can make a change at any time, it's like a whole lot more efficient to be working in groups, and you can do this in a totally different manner. So it's kind of like going from Excel spreadsheets just on your computer to like a shared Google Doc that anyone can edit.
All right. So in your bio, you say that Chainlink Labs is trying to help tokenize and connect the world's financial systems. What does that mean exactly, especially the word tokenize?
Yeah. So when we say tokenize, what we mean is we're representing an object on the blockchain, right, in token form. So, the most famous token is probably like Bitcoin or like Ethereum or something like that. But really, any asset can be tokenized, right? It's just a digital representation of this thing we call it on chain. So just as this is really just, you can think about records used to be digitized, right? They used to be kept on paper, and then all of a sudden we put them on computers, and that's digitization. So this is just another sort of evolution in their form, right? So going from digital or physical still to tokenized, which is just a special type of digital representation.
And what would you say the benefit of tokenizing this information is?
Yeah, so I like to call this like superpowers. What are the superpowers of a tokenized asset? And so I think it's maybe most helpful to if we provide a super tangible example, like say we have a house, right? Like people can relate to houses. And so if you tokenize a house or a piece of real estate and you put it on the blockchain, like what can you do now that you couldn't do before, right? Like what's uniquely enabled by this technology. And so when there's a few superpowers, the ones that I like to call out are peer-to-peer transferability, right? So anyone can send to anyone else, which is really interesting. Instant or near instant settlement. So like when we transfer ownership, it settles on who the owner is very quickly. Other things are like fractional ownership, which is really cool. Or then there's also a bunch of like automation things that you can do. And then another superpower I like to call is like you can now, it becomes composable. This asset becomes programmable. So if you have a tokenized asset, you can write code that's like, if this happens, then transfer this here, right? Or is like maybe it's really easy to have 100 people own this asset, right? Rather than just one person. Something that these are all things that are like 10 or 100x better than existing systems. So you can think about, right now, if I wanted to transfer money from, say, my bank account to your bank account, or imagine if we were in different countries, there's this thing that's called T+2, which is how long it takes to settle, right? To change the ownership. And like when I am sending you money, like say my Venmo account or whatever, Venmo has abstracted this all away where like you get credited and I get debited. But on the back end, that money doesn't actually move and change ownership for 2 days, right? And so now we're talking about if I can just send you this thing in a wallet, or I can just send you this thing from me to you, it takes like 5 minutes. So we're talking about something that's like multiple orders of magnitude better than existing systems. So long way of saying when you tokenize an asset, you can give it all these properties that it didn't have before that are just way better. So if you think about when you digitize an asset, what could you do? What was way better about it than when this asset just existed on paper? It's sort of a similar stepwise improvement.
All right. So we're giving it superpowers, as you say, and you might not tokenize your house. It's not like it changed the house at all, but what it has done is it kind of changes the control of ownership and how easy it is to transfer it, as you said. And also if we wanted to turn it into a timeshare as just to extend this thing where suddenly 4 or 100 people owned it at different times, all of that would go into this digital ledger, which is blockchain. Am I getting close to that?
Yeah, I think that's about right. And then another, piece of the puzzle you could add on to it is like you could take like a loan out against it, as simple as clicking a few buttons, right? Like think about the loan process that you have to go through for a house or digital or for residential property right now. You have to talk to a loan officer. There's many days. There's lots of paperwork. There's lawyers, like whatever. But in this on-chain world, if anyone's not familiar, like there's protocols where you can just put up your asset, click a few buttons, and take a loan out against it, right? So you can do these things in a matter of minutes instead of days or weeks. So yeah, so basically all those things are possible when you put something on chain. You're not changing, you're not literally turning the asset into a token, but you're representing the ownership and it can just transfer a lot easier.
All right. So now that we've kind of wrapped our heads a little bit around what blockchain actually is, what are some ways in which we might leverage blockchain to market our own business?
One of the superpowers of like when you have a token is it creates incentive alignment in a way that could never exist before. And so we previously talked about like tokenizing houses or something like that. But I think if we take a step back and actually think about like what we can do, it's like you can create novel incentive alignment structures, like novel, looking for the word here, like loyalty programs, reward programs, things where you can distribute rewards to your customers or your wannabe customers a lot faster and more efficiently than you ever could before. So I think it'd be worthwhile digging into like some specific examples of how you might be able to do this. But
Yeah.
as a marketing professional, it's like the thing that you would use blockchain for is like coming up with a creative way to use tokens to incentivize your customers in ways that you couldn't before.
All right. So give us some real world examples of how some type of business might incentivize somebody and leverage blockchain at the same time.
Yeah, so I think the closest thing to consumers right now would be NFTs, right? And so NFTs are a token that it stands for non-fungible token, but you can think of that as mean like there's a one of one or whatever. There's like one representation of a token, and so one of the things like that got really popular is people like an artist created artists create collections of NFTs, right? And people use them as their profile pictures, and that's cool. And you can say, okay, there's maybe not a ton of value in like just like having a Twitter profile picture that's a monkey or something, right? Or a pudgy penguin. But what they ended up doing is like, well, okay, well, if you own this thing, well, now you can get exclusive rights to this party we're hosting on a yacht, right? And the only people who can get in are the ones who own this thing. Or maybe we have this really exclusive online chat forum, right? That you want to get into because all the cool kids are hanging out there and that sort of stuff. Well, in order to get in there, the access is actually gated by ownership of this item, right? So now there's this other element here of like your customers or wannabe customers can own this piece of property, and you're gating access to things that they want or providing exclusive experiences based on ownership to this.
I know with NFTs, we've talked about NFTs a couple times on this podcast before, that you can bake in something where every time somebody sells this NFT, so like let's say that you had a membership that you sold, like you had a marketing club, you sold memberships to it, that maybe you sell it, say, for $100. And then somebody could then turn around and sell that NFT to somebody else. They would give up access to your membership, but then the new person would have access to the membership. But if I understand it correctly, the NFT could be set up so as the creator, I would get 10% as an example every time that NFT was sold at whatever rate the person sold it for. Is that true?
Yeah. So this goes exactly back to that programmability piece that we added on. It's like someone listening to this might say, okay, well, I can do that just based on my existing membership program, right? I can just make an Excel spreadsheet of all the people in here and I can invite those people to my yacht party, right? And so it's like, well, what is the NFT doing that's different? And the thing is, when you have this digital ownership and you have this programmable thing, you can build all this programmable logic around it. So one of the things you can do is like, well, okay, well, now maybe this person can sell their NFT and we route royalties back to the creator. Like that's pretty cool. Or maybe route it back to the business owner. You can also do things like, well, maybe you can rent it out for 30 days and then it'll come back. Or maybe you make it so it can never be transferred. Or maybe you make it so if you transfer it actually loses 50% of its value. The original owner gets 90% off, but the second owner gets 50% off. Basically, whatever you want to do, you can build that logic into it. So it's like, this is where it becomes better than just having your existing loyalty program.
So we just finished our first ever virtual summit. And one of the things we did is it was free to access, but then you could buy a VIP pass that would give you access to all 30 recordings on demand for a full year. As an example, like I could have sold those on chain, as part of blockchain, and said, after you've watched the 30 videos, if you've gotten all the value you can get out of it, you can actually turn around and sell that to somebody else at whatever price the market will bear. So that person might actually end up making money on the summit just by watching all the videos and then selling it for more. And I could have programmed it so that every time it gets sold, I get another commission on top of whatever I made the first time around.
Yeah, exactly. And what you just illuminated, like it underscores this new incentive alignment because not only is your customer who's selling this and got a bunch of value out of it going to profit off of that, and that's pretty cool. Guess who's going to be a huge cheerleader and trying to push the success of your program? All the people who
Anybody,
bought
right?
this, right? Anyone who bought it and wants a secondary market to send it to, right? So you're creating, they want a secondary market to sell into, right? So they want to build up how awesome you are and share that value and have other people believe in it as well. So it's like this new level of like your customers want you to succeed because they share in the success that is really hard to duplicate otherwise.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Now, that's obviously great for a virtual product. And I know we've kind of touched on some physical products, but can you give us any examples of where I'm trying to think of a business that wouldn't even be thinking about blockchain, like home repair or something like that? Like, what are some ways of tying it into a physical product that you've seen out there?
Yeah, so Starbucks had a program. I think they actually shut it down recently just because of like the shifting tides of sentiment towards NFTs. But Gucci does another one as well. Nike is really big in this space. So Nike's a really interesting pioneer in this space. So especially around their sneakers. So they have a bunch of patents around it. You can go read them and stuff. But basically, like you can buy these NFTs, and owning the NFT gives you the right to get this sneaker, right? Or to redeem it. So there's an interesting play around that. There's a startup that I was talking to that does comic books, and they issue the right to own this comic book as an NFT, and then but it's housed securely in a warehouse and stays in pristine condition. So if you ever want to sell it and transfer ownership and all that sort of stuff, you can do that digitally, and then whoever actually wants to redeem it can then cash it in. And then the important part is that NFT gets, quote, burned, which means basically destroyed. And so that way the redemption mechanism destroys the NFT and you get the physical item in return. So there are a lot of interesting ways to tie it into physical goods. I think where you've seen the trend pick up the most is collectibles, high prestige goods. So things like I mentioned, Gucci or like collectible Nike sneakers or comic books or that sort of stuff. That's where the most traction is right now.
And so if I said, like, let's say that I wanted, getting back to the summit idea, let's say that the next year for the summit, I wanted to do this. What's involved with me actually creating whether it's NFTs or blockchain, of creating that scenario where I would sell access to with a VIP pass? It's tied to blockchain. It allows somebody to sell the product as many times as need be, down the line. I get 10% of each one as an example. Like, do I turn to a company like Chainlink Labs? Is this something I can do myself? Like, what are the actual mechanics of bringing this into reality?
Yeah, so it wouldn't be something that we do at Chainlink specifically, but what you can do is there are platforms that allow you to mint. It's called minting your own NFTs, and there's platforms that allow you to build this programming logic into it. So honestly, it would be just quick Google search of those sort of things like NFT minting platform. So when you mentioned like the blockchain stuff, if you think about the tech stack, the blockchains would be analogous to like a cloud provider. So like say AWS or Google Cloud or whatever, or Microsoft Azure. So we would, if I was launching startup today or something, I would never try and build my own cloud. I would just buy some space from AWS and I would try and build my application on top of it and host it there. And that's what you'd be doing here. So you would find a tool or a platform that lets you mint your own NFTs and build some logic into it, and then just choose whatever blockchain you want to deploy it on. And that would be totally abstracted away from you and from your users.
I could also see like some interesting things you could do with warranties, where you sell a warranty that's on the chain, and then you could determine if the person sells the car or the house or the boiler that's under warranty, and how that ownership is transferred, and what, does it come with 100% valuation? Does it, do you lose some of the valuation or whatever the case may be? Does it expire? So there are some interesting ways that you could tie it into real world products and services. It sounds like that really any business, if they find the right platform or the right vendor to help them with it, could start to offer some of these services built into their products and offerings.
Yeah, 100%. And to be totally fair, the average consumer is not we're still in that very much early adopter phase, right? So the average consumer of, say, a house boiler or whatever probably isn't on chain, right? Probably doesn't have like an on chain address and maybe might not be super savvy. So these use cases are 100% within the realm of possibility of what you could technically do. But right now, the like people who are willing to venture into this space tend to be super tech savvy, or like the dollar amount of the ticket item is worth the extra hoop, or like the flow that they're not typically used to. But yeah, you do mention it, like this can be broadly applied to anything. Like I'm a firm believer, we're talking about replatforming like almost all of the world's assets. Like this isn't happening because it's cool, it's happening because it's better, right? Like in the same way that everything got digitized because digital records are better than written records, this is going to happen. It's inevitable. We're just at such an early stage right now that it's like the creatives and the early adopters and the collectibles are where the movement is happening.
Right. And I remember, because I was around when the internet more or less started, I remember back in the early days of the internet where I was on a 28.8 modem. Things were very slow. There wasn't a whole lot on the internet. Most of the stuff was on things like CompuServe or AOL. It wasn't really easily accessible. It wasn't easy to navigate the web to find those few resources. But over time, the tools became more consumer friendly. They became easier to create websites. It became easier to visit websites and navigate around. So yes, we're at the very beginning of what might happen, what might become. But at the same time, this is where we were 30 years ago with the web, and now we're just here with this thing called blockchain.
Yeah, it's such a great perspective. And the level of innovation and how fast things are getting better is truly mind-blowing, because literally people from every part of the world are working on this. And it's just happening so fast and so rapidly. Like we're going to get there soon, right? We're no doubt we're going to get there. And it's just really good to keep that perspective. Just because maybe something is not as simple as you want it to be today doesn't mean it's going to be like that for very long.
No, and there's obviously first mover advantage for people who do want to do it. But at the same time, you have to recognize that you've got to have the audience who are also first movers, who are early adopters at this stage of the game for really you to kind of see fruition of this. And so I was curious about this. If somebody's listening and they're wondering about the ROI for their business when it comes to blockchain, what do you tell them?
Yeah. Well, obviously the answer is going to be, it depends on what you're trying to do and that sort of stuff. But, for this audience, being marketing professionals and trying to think about what they can implement today that like gives them an edge, right? It's like, can you build a loyalty program, or can you build a customer alignment mechanism that no one else has, right? And the answer is probably yes. And so the question is like, what is your ROI? It's like, how much would it be worth to you if you had a rabid fan base of supporters who would go out of their way to promote you for no reason? They're financially incentivized to be promoters for you, right? Think of the companies that have done this amazingly, right? You have like Apple and Tesla. People who own Teslas also own Tesla shares. And the first people who tell you that you should go buy a Tesla are Tesla owners. And think about Apple's rise to fame, and like people who own expensive Apple products also are getting really rich off of Apple stock, right? So if you can build some mechanism where your customers are sharing in the success of your programs, like if you think about your digital asset or your digital asset summit, think of your digital summit. If you can create a rabid fan base that is financially aligned to your success, that's worth everything, right?
Yeah.
So it's just really the sky is the limit in terms of what you can accomplish if you do it right.
So you touched on this before, because obviously end user adoption is an issue right now. What are some of the other barriers to blockchain adoption?
The user interface is very unfamiliar to folks at the moment. So right now, the typical user interface in the crypto, blockchain, Web3 world, whatever you want to call it, is you have a wallet address and you log into applications with your wallet. The Web 2 way of doing this is you log in with your email and your password, right? So there's just like a different form of interacting with these things. And it's going in the direction where the logins and the interactions are becoming more and more like the Web 2 look and feels that we're used to. But some people are really uncomfortable with this, right? They have to remember a 15-word seed phrase to unlock their wallet, right? Which is
Right.
very intimidating. You hear the stories about someone who maybe locked their wallet and lost it in a landfill and has got $50 million of Bitcoin in it, and they're using a metal detector at a landfill now, which is a true story, by the way.
Right.
So that's a little intimidating to people. And so this concept of account abstraction is happening. People are working on it. It'll get to a really user-friendly place soon. But I would say that's the big barrier right now, where like only the bravest are willing to venture there.
Now, if somebody is intrigued by what you've shared with us today, how might they get started with blockchain?
There's a lot of great resources out there. I always point people to the A16Z crypto canon. So just type in A16Z crypto canon. It's one of the first things that pops up. It's organized in a really amazing way, from the fundamentals of the underlying infrastructure to a whole bunch of subsections on applications and things that might be super relevant to this audience. So it's a bunch of links. You can think of it as almost like the front door or the front page of your blockchain learning. So I always tell people to go there, and it lets you go at your own pace, and you can just dive in to whatever concepts are the most interesting to you. And it links out to all the best resources on the internet.
Now, Jimmy, as we're recording this, it's a day before we're about to announce tickets for the 10th annual Agents of Change Digital Marketing Conference right here in Portland, Maine, where you and I both reside. So putting on your creative thinking cap, what are some, it's probably too late for this year, but what are some ways that you could see somebody like me leveraging blockchain to create a more valuable or engaging live in-person event experience?
I think the idea you laid out at the beginning of having this sort of NFT gated access that you could resell, I think that's a really, really, really interesting one. I think there are all sorts of opportunities there's a concept in the crypto space, which is a very event organized or event driven space, where they're called POAPs, the proof of attendance protocol. So people who show up in person can have this NFT that verifies that they showed up, sort of like a collectible. Or you can think about like people who collect postcards of places they've gone, right? But you can only get one if you showed up in person, right? And so that's a really interesting thing. And the only people who can ever have one showed up in person. And so like it can create this sort of, one, it can be a great memory for folks, but also can create this in-group of people who were there at the first one or the second one, or who have the most, right? And so you can think about maybe 3 years down the line, if you have 3 of these NFTs showing that you've showed up in person 3 years in a row, there's an exclusive event for you, right?
Right.
Like maybe that's a really interesting gated experience they can buy. And hey, if you don't want to restrict it from people transferring it, maybe there's a secondary market of people trying to scoop up a third one or buy that exclusive first 2024 issued NFT so they can get into your exclusive party, right? So there's, I think, a lot of interesting dynamics that you could do there.
Very cool. Maybe for 2025. All right. So I want you to put on take off your thinking cap and maybe put on your Swarma hat and predict the future here. Where do you see the role of blockchain in marketing in the next 5 years?
Yeah. So I have this thing where in 5 years, it's going to be just as silly to call a company a blockchain company as it is to call a company like an internet company, right? Like it's just going to be part of your stack. And so it just depends on how much you want to leverage it or where in the stack it is. But I think blockchain enabled loyalty programs are going to go from the fringe to like maybe a very interesting minority in the next 5 years, right? Like maybe there's some sort of critical mass of 10 to 15% of consumer facing companies are using some sort of blockchain enabled loyalty program.
Very interesting. And of course, I said Swarma hat, which is really just shaved beef. I don't know what I was thinking when I said that. I think I was thinking of a Swami hat, something like Johnny Carson in the old days when he would like lift an envelope to his head and predict what was inside. Anyway, this has been really eye-opening, Jimmy, and I really appreciate you coming by. If people want to learn more about you, more about what you're doing in blockchain, or more about Chainlink Labs, where can we send them online?
Yeah, so if you want to check out Chainlink, go to chain.link. If you want to connect with me, I'm on LinkedIn and Twitter. It's actually James_Haight. And then my LinkedIn is just James Haight. And you can find me there. Send me a message. Happy to connect. If you're ever in Portland or in Maine in general, we do run a blockchain Maine group. So find us there too. We do quarterly meetups, which would be super fun to have anyone there who's interested as well.
Awesome. Jimmy, thank you so much for your time today.
Wonderful. Happy to be here. Thank you.
I hope that was as informative for you as it was for me. I definitely have a better sense of the impact that blockchain is going to have on our business and on our clients' business, and of course, all the marketing we do. I think Jimmy laid it out really well. I also just want to stress that Jimmy came on as an expert in blockchain himself, although I did ask about his company. He's just speaking for himself and not for his company. They're in a different line of business. But Jimmy, thank you so much. Great content. Really appreciate it. If you missed anything that Jimmy shared, or you want to check out the links that he mentioned, or whatever you need, you can find a full transcript and the key takeaways at our website at theagentsofchange.com/535. And while you're at the site, be sure to check out all the information about our upcoming conference on October 9th and 10th, 2024. And be sure to register while the early bird tickets are still available. We've got more great content coming your way, so make sure that you're subscribed on your favorite podcasting platform. And while you're there, feel free to leave us a review of what you're hearing and let us know what you think. We'll be back in 7 with more great marketing content for you.
Don't miss another thrilling episode of the Agents of Change podcast. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform.